Okay, so I'm going to talk about EasyBuild at our site again. Last time I've been talking about it was 5 years ago, I think, in Barcelona. So just take the short opportunity to show off our nice student building at our site, but won't go too much into the details. I'm still working at our university in Dresden, which is quite old and largish. And we are quite proud to have a lot of international students too. There's also not much new at the actual department where I'm working on, which is the Center for Information Services, and you can read it. Just call it the ZIH, much faster. And new thing here is that there has been recently some restructuring into a larger, well, let's say, ecosystem of organizations and departments and sub-departments. And the overall structure is called the Center for Interdisciplinary Digital Sciences, where the ZIH is one department of. And a screenshot here from our go-to tool, maybe signature one, as many might recognize, that's Vampire, for analyzing traces of some software for performance reasons, to detect bottlenecks in communication or execution workflow. We have a rather large cluster, so starting off with the old one, which was called Taurus, with almost 2,000 nodes. Some GPUs there of different architectures, Kepler, Volta. Volta on the Power 9 nodes I already tried about. And also different configurations of the nodes on how much RAM they have. Then we got some AMD Rome nodes and called the partition Romeo. And then, of course, there's a Julia. That's actually a special partition which only has a single node with 48 terabytes of RAM. So you can do some actual large computing there, like Earth simulations, as it's all in a unified address space. And recently we started naming our cluster partitions after stars. So there's Alpha Centauri with the recent AMD CPUs and A100s. And a new CPU cluster using the Sapphire Rapids with also considerable amount of nodes. And also good amount of main memory. There's one new GPU cluster, which is currently being ordered. I don't have the details yet, but there's one coming, which will be the next one after the Alpha partition, or Alpha Centauri for the full name. We just call it Alpha. And of course, we're using EasyBuild and LMod. And previously, we had some hand-built modules. So the module file itself was handwritten. We don't do that anymore. Also, previously, we used the flat module name scheme, but we found it more and more difficult to explain to users that they have to use the GCC core module with this version, with the FOSS module of this version. And yeah, even, well, when I'm updating an easy config, I'm still having trouble matching all this together, which version goes with which version. And so we started rolling out the hierarchical modules on one architecture first, so one of those partitions, and have now basically fully switched to that on the occasion that we upgraded basically all our system software. And also we thought about when do we uninstall or delete software and modules. We don't want to keep them forever. So we started creating meta modules roughly after the EasyBuild version scheme of like 2 releases a year. but we use numerical ones. So one roughly around April, one roughly around October. And consider deleting some release meta module along with all the software at some point in time. But this way we can put the most recent one as a default and gradually get users to use just the recent one. As for the users, we are using Slurm and have one partition per architecture, such that at least for this partition, there is some same CPU, same GPUs, so that they don't get too confused when they go onto our cluster. And we used to have a common login node, or multiple actually, that users log in and submit to the individual partitions. They store their data on Lastro file systems, and we introduced workspaces to manage the lifetime of the data. So they create a workspace, which is basically a folder, which expires after a given amount of time, after which it is first moved to a hidden folder and eventually deleted. You can also set up some reminders such that they get a notification a couple of days before it will be deleted. You just have to remember to pay attention to those before you go on vacation, or you come back and your workspace is gone. That's why we have this intermediate deletion where you can restore it. And we have a quite extensive online documentation about everything that's important to know for users. And the special thing here, it's Markdown based. So this is quite readable and renders to some nice text. Having this, we allow actually the users to contribute to this in a sort of wiki style, so that not the HPC admins have to write everything, but pretty much at least everyone from the department or even users, when they find something that isn't quite clear, they can just go to our GitLab and contribute to this. We have a number of checks there in the form of pre-commit hooks for Git, such as checking styles and spelling and that the links are valid, which is also later checked in the merge requests. This helps such that the user doesn't open a merge request just to be told, yeah, you had an issue when you committed this. It moves it a little bit forward, which might be something useful for EasyBuild too, but I guess the test suite there is a little bit too extensive to be done in a pre-commit hook. But yeah, it helps to avoid more and more communication going back and forth in a merge request. And we also automatically deploy it after such a merge request was merged. First to a preview and then to the official documentation pages online. As for our modules, well, we had or have still the situation of this multiple CPUs and GPU architectures. So that was a bit tricky to get right. Previously, we had one module folders and a software folder that was basically sym-linked into architecture-specific folders. So the main folder that the user would see is something like software installed, and it would, for example, point to the Haswell or the Rome or wherever. That didn't really work that nice, for example, with some build systems. But in general, it was pretty easy for us and for the users because they didn't need to worry about the mechanisms behind that, and we could still optimize for our CPUs. And yeah, however, it wasn't easy as we wanted it to be, and we thought about how to improve it. One main pain point was that the users went to this generic login node and tried to load some modules, we had one single module folder, so they could load a module where the software, the binaries on their partitions weren't available because we didn't install it on that partition, or it was for some reason broken. So the user wouldn't find out until they actually run their job. That was very confusing for them. And for the user, if they went to the login node and wanted to set up some environment, for example, with pip Python, or just build some software, then again, if they build it on x86 node and run it on a power node, well, not going to work. And pip will, of course, download the files for this architecture and not the one you're going to run it on. So also with the login nodes, this was not a nice solution. So first we came up with interactive partitions with just a few nodes per architecture and rather small time limit, which allows for some experimentation, but not for a too long runtime, such that many users can use it. But still not perfect solution because they were either full or unused, which the first is bad for the users who want to use it. The second is bad for us as we want some high utilization, of course. Also, it is some extra work for the users who just want to set up an environment before submitting a job. They had to first request a job on this interactive partition. And because not all modules were actually installed for all partition, we had to provide some pretty obscure scripts such that the users can find out if the module will be available for their partition. Yeah. And with the growing number of architectures, also the number of partitions kept growing, which was a lot of stress for the Slurm controller, where the scheduler at some point just took way too long. So we split everything up into some subclusters, each with their own login nodes and basically just a single partition, each getting their own Slurm controller. And there is this nice environment variable for lmod, where you can say, okay, you have this same root folder, but a specific system, which you then set, for example, in the .profile RC or the other scripts that run when the user logs in. As we have login nodes taken from this partition, this works pretty well that the user can load the modules for exactly these partitions even on the login nodes, and they can also use it for some small tasks like setting up a virtual env or just run a small test or build there. Yeah, we have about 2 of those login nodes per partition. They're taken off the available nodes, but basically replace these interactive partitions we used to have. So in the end, this turned out pretty well. For installing modules, well, long time ago now, it was done by one admin, basically by hand, with a set of scripts which wrapped EasyBuild to set all the options that we wanted, such that, yeah, they don't have to type it by hand every time. But now we switch to GitLab and integration there. So first, of course, everything is versioned in GitLab. And we set up some automatic deployment to the cluster. So once the scripts are committed, they're copied to the cluster. And we gave some selected people access to this GitLab so that they can contribute. Especially important if there are some specialist easy configs where you need to get the right guys to investigate on those. So we give them access to this GitLab, and then they can look at their easy configs. As for the easy configs, we still had to manage those different subclusters now. So in this repository, we split them up into different folders, and the folder name basically encoded where they are coming from or where they are going to. And every time a merge request is opened with some changed easy configs, GitLab Runner will start a Slurm job which installs this EasyConfig on the cluster. And using the path where this EasyConfig resides in to basically get where on which partition, on which cluster to run this job. We set up also some nice integration with this GitLab where it would search for a specific issue corresponding to this EasyConfig and parse the labels set in this issue to give some flags to EasyBuild, such as rebuild, or in the beginning, we also did something like except EULA for like CUDA or Intel compilers, just to have it explicit. And also we set up some sanity checks before and after running this build to shake out some issues before we actually start a long EasyBuild run. For example, that the required versions are available and that the required environment is set up. One thing where we ran into was that the user under which this Slurm job was running had own EasyBuild configuration file in their home folder, which this EasyBuild run would then pick up and change the site-wide EasyBuild configuration. So we make sure we set this one EasyBuild configuration in the environment such that it ignores the user's config files. Talking about the actual config files, not the easy config files. And after the build, we actually have this job comment in the relevant issue or merge request and attach the logs generated during the build as artifacts. So basically everything can be done in this GitLab, which connects quite well to EasyBob. So probably gonna steal some ideas from there and compare what we can improve there. And as I mentioned, all the scripts are automatically copied to the cluster such that one of the admins or domain experts can log into it, allocate an interactive job and run those scripts manually to just debug issues that come up, such that they don't have to go through CI all the time or stop the build at some point.
This is a private GitLab, right? All the scripts are not available yet, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Just to show how this looks like, so this is an extract from the GitLab YAML file. We have some main template, which basically just runs a shell script and has some rules set up such that it doesn't run, for example, for draft merge requests and reacts on changes for a specific path, which is then later parameterized in subjobs, which, for example, look like this on the right-hand side, where these variables, such as the cluster name, get set. And this is also then used in the text part, which determines on which cluster the job will be allocated. And it's actually pretty easy to add a new job configuration for a new cluster because it's only a couple of lines. And we also have even more extensions there for the different releases. So they then extend from this template jobs. Yeah, not to, want to go into the detail, but if you want to look it up in the GitLab documentation to understand what's happening there, the main part is the extends keyword of the GitLab YAML file. Very helpful to avoid duplicating everything. So not everything can be installed by us. So we allow and actually encourage the users installing their own modules by providing EasyBuild as a module and document the workflow for users to use this EasyBuild to install their own modules on top of this global module tree. Yeah, you don't want every user to reinstall GCC in their home or file system. no use for that, just wasted time and wasted space. One of the good options from EasyBuild there is listed there. If you don't know it, look it up. It basically says, okay, if you load this global module, also look into some other paths in the hierarchical module naming scheme, such that those user modules are actually available when you load the core GCC module, for example. So teamwork here. We don't do everything. We encourage the users to do it when we are, for example, not fast enough or simply refuse to install some version of the software, which only they need. Yeah, so concluding it, of course, we're using EasyBuild and LMod with mostly official easy configs and just a small number of hooks for customization and site specifics. Such, for example, for our GPU clusters, we limit the number of CUDA compute capabilities we build for in the hooks, which detect, again, from the LMod system name, we set anyway which partition we are on and then set the compute capabilities to the right value. The hierarchical module structure is much easier to explain to the users and avoid them trying to load incompatible modules. This was actually a major pain point before. And this separation of clusters with each their own login nodes taken from this architecture also helped a lot in how the users are able to interact with this. Yeah, and as mentioned, everything installing is automated via GitLab, and we get domain experts to contribute there too. And what we don't have, we let the user install. This option I mentioned is actually already quite good, but we want some improvements there and how it uses the core modules. There is an open issue about that, such that it doesn't detect the modules in the root or the global modules because of the modules all folder. Yeah, maybe we can fix that for EasyBuild 5. But that's pretty much it.
All right. Thank you, Alexander. Any questions?
I have questions about your Slurm configurations. You put all your cluster in the federation so that you can submit from one login node to another partitions?
No, that's one of the things we lost while splitting it. They all have their own Slurm scheduler, so they're almost fully independent, only sharing basically the file system.
Yeah, but well, I'm not expert in partitions. They are also kind of independent, but you can submit from one to the other, right? But there's only one database, if I'm correct. But the scheduler is, I mean, I don't know if there's a Slurm expert there, but the scheduler is still separate, right, in partitions.
Well, if you have a single cluster with multiple partitions, there's a one database. If you make multiple Slurm clusters, you can still use a single database.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
But there is multiple schedulers. But in terms of scheduling, they are all scheduling separately, right? Yeah.
Another question on those power nodes. How long will you still be dealing with them, let's say?
Likely not for too long, but the OS upgrade, for example, and the new split to the individual subclusters also was done for the power cluster. So it's going to stick around for a bit, but especially for updates, it's going to be an issue in the near future.
Yeah.
So they might be dropped at some point.
Because that seems to be something that it's a pretty small partition. It was like 30 nodes or something. Or just in terms of effort that you have to put into it compared to the hardware that is there, that's a big disconnect, I guess. Yeah.
It just had, at the time, the very nice Volta GPUs that we didn't have anywhere else and nothing comparable. We initially actually named it the ML partition because it was meant for machine learning.
Yep.
Yeah, now we have the Ampere GPUs, so people are using more and more that. Let's see when we can get rid of those.
Yep.
Um,
I guess you'll be happy when they're gone. Or all right. Any other questions? Yeah, in the back.
So how did you manage to convince users to write documentation? Or even to write easy configs? Are we the only sites that does everything for the users? Or general question.
Can you repeat the last question, sorry?
How did you convince your users to write documentation?
We encourage them, but it's mostly basically everyone working at the department who ends up writing this. But we have this opportunity for users to improve. It still ends up at someone from the department's desk, but at least it's split out at much more people than it was before.
And a more general question to the community. Do your users write easy configs, or is it just yourself? We have like one or two. Yeah. So in our side, it's just us.
We have some not really users, but developers, for example, for Vampire, that provide basically the module for their software. That's what I meant by domain experts who have access to this GitLab. But not so many users, but a couple are there. Or at least they want to install some more recent easy config from upstream EasyBuild. So not writing them themselves, but installing themselves.
So one of the things we've noticed with our site is we have quite a few users who I mentioned that we have a tier 2. There's also another one not very far away. And some of our users across them, and several of us also use EasyBuild. So there's a shared set of instructions for building a particular bit of software on top of it. They don't EasyBuild the end bit of software, but the same instructions work across each of the clusters. So they've documented that between them. And we've seen that. And the other thing we see is in a couple of our areas, we have somebody who is dedicated sort of tech support for that area, and they write at least not on documentation on our site, but documentation on their internal site for their users using our system. But part of that is because that's actually what their job is to do, is to help their users use our system.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, similar to the previous talk. That's how I got into EasyBuild. I was installing TensorFlow, which has a rather complicated installation structure. And I didn't just want to document what I did. I wanted to write it in code such that I don't have to repeat it for the next version of TensorFlow or when I have to try it next. So that's why I was looking at EasyBuild in the first place, to codify the installation instructions.
So what we do sometimes is install software for users into their account with EasyBuild, and then we tell them how they can run it themselves with the commands, and then they can update the software, for example, or make some changes and make a local variant of it. So that's middle ground, I guess.
I would say it's really just nobody else is on it.
And it does take time. In Ghent, we have groups that write easy configs, test the installations, and then open a ticket and attach the easy config and ask us to install it centrally. Those are the exceptions, but they do exist. And it just takes time that people realize that it's a good idea and it's actually helping themselves. But those are the good users. But yeah.
Sorry, I'll just.
So users stay for 4 to 5 years and then they are gone. So nobody takes the effort to learn.
One of the questions, because Kenneth must have EasyBuild as a module installed, I'm assuming. Yeah. Do you have EasyBuild? Do you have EasyBuild available as a module? So yeah, because one of the comments I have, we don't make it available. Or
on purpose, or
yeah. So it's the complexity of the system is that you can submit from our login for our tier 3, you can submit from our login node to any of the CPU stroke GPU, which included power at the time when we had power. So a user has to have some understanding of what they're doing before they can install anything. So these are slightly more complicated, but we do provide instructions. I'm passing it that way, I think.
Yeah, we should wrap up here because we're okay.
So a question for Alexander, and I guess a general question as well. For the ones that do make EasyBuild available as a module, do you just make the raw EasyBuild available, or do you have any extra default configuration, I guess, that you add to that to make it set some, maybe not built in home by default and stuff like that?
A tiny amount of documentation. It's just a regular EasyBuild.
So just documentation.
Same for us. It's written on the documentation how they can basically use our global config file, which is deployed via GitLab, and then put their stuff on top of that.
Right,
but
yeah.
It's not in the module, it's in the documentation.
Yeah, so we've got a few users that we'd like to push towards doing their own, and I think we're currently looking at having some more defaults set on top, which hopefully helps them.
We should switch.
We have two modules that users can load that it makes a software installation module, one for users and one for projects. And that sets up all the environment and then using the NMARS using one. So.
And do you also set up like the target, the installation directory, or how far does this go?
No, they do more generic builds.
Okay.
For the users.
Okay, so we'll wrap up here. Thanks a lot, Alexander. Yeah.